Welcome to the deep dive. So we've been handed this stack of material. We've got articles, research notes, eyewitness accounts.
Even transcripts from some documentary-style videos, yeah.
Right, and it's all centered around, well, one of the most fascinating and, let's be honest, controversial figures of the 20th century, Bobby Fischer.
That's right. Robert James Fischer. His name was everywhere, wasn't it? Not just in chess circles, but globally, especially, during the Cold War. So our mission here in this deep dive is really to unpack the story that these sources tell. We want to pull out the key pieces of information to understand the whole picture. His truly incredible achievements in chess, the significant personal challenges and very public controversies that really marked his life, and also his complex, lasting contributions to the game itself.
It's definitely a story of genius, huge triumph, but also, unfortunately, deep personal turmoil. It's not simple.
Not at all, and the sources reflect that complexity.
So let's jump straight into the material, see what it reveals about this enigma that was Bobby Fischer. We'll look at his legendary rise, the difficult path he walked, and the mark he undeniably left on chess. To really get the full picture, you first have to grasp just how amazing he was over the board. I mean, the sources are just packed with examples of his early brilliance. It's clear he was a chess prodigy right from a really young age.
Oh, absolutely. Learned chess at 6, apparently from instructions in a set he got.
Wow.
And then just dove headfirst into studying books really intensely.
And it shows how quickly he took off. By age 7, the sources say he played his first public game in a simultaneous exhibition against a former Scottish champion, held out for 15 minutes.
Which is pretty good for a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
But maybe the moment that really put him on the map, internationally speaking, came when he was just 13.
You're talking about the game of the century.
Exactly. The sources all talk about this game against international master Donald Byrne back in 1956. It wasn't just a win, it was, well, stunning. A masterpiece.
Anscommuch called it that, right? The game of the century.
He did. And the sources specifically mention that incredibly daring queen sacrifice on move 17.
Which looks completely crazy at first glance.
Totally. But it led to this forced sequence where Fischer's other pieces just perfectly coordinated to trap Byrne's king. Byrne had to resign. It won the Brilliancy Prize for the tournament. And, players still study it today. It shows incredible tactical vision, calculation, risk-taking.
Okay, hold on. Winning a game like that, sacrificing your queen against an international master at 13, that's just wild. It speaks to a level of understanding, of courage, that's almost unbelievable at that age.
It really does.
And the sources show his dominance didn't stop there, especially here in the U.S.
That's right. He won his first U.S. championship at age 14, youngest ever at the time. And this was a big deal, a very prestigious tournament.
And he didn't just win it once. The sources say he won it a record 8 times.
8 times. And his 1964 win. That was something else.
The perfect score.
Exactly. The sources state he won the 1964 U.S. Championship with a perfect 11-0 score, 11 wins, 0 draws, 0 losses.
Against the best players in the country.
Right. It had never happened before. The sources point out that chess publications around the world wrote about this unparalleled achievement. It's still the only perfect score in the history of that tournament.
Think about the focus, the sheer dominance needed for that. It's staggering. And international recognition came quickly after that.
Became a grandmaster at 15 again, the youngest ever at that time. Though one source does mention Judith Polgar broke that record later on.
Okay.
And he showed early promise internationally too. The sources point to him tying for first with Boris Spassky, his future rival at a strong tournament in Mar del Plata, Argentina in 1960.
Finished 2 points clear of everyone else. That must have sent a signal. And the start of that famous rivalry and, well, friendship for a while with Spassky.
Then the sources really paint this picture of his path towards the World Championship in the early 70s. This is when his dominance reached truly astonishing levels.
Like the 1970 Interzonal.
Exactly. In Palma de Mallorca, he won it with 18.5 points out of 23, finished 3.5 points ahead of the entire field. The sources highlight that's a record margin for an Interzonal, which is, a really tough tournament, the qualifier for the candidates matches.
And this is where things get almost unbelievable, according to the sources. After that huge interzonal win came the 1971 candidates matches.
Right.
The sources state, almost like they can't believe it either, that he swept both Mark Taimanov and Bet Larsen with 6 in-row scores. 6 wins, 0 losses, 0 draws. Against both of them.
It was just unheard of. Taimanov was a world-class Soviet grandmaster. Larsen was one of the strongest players outside the Soviet bloc. beating either of them 6-0 was shocking to beat both like that.
Yeah, the sources convey just total astonishment in the chess world at the time.
And he wasn't done. He then faced former world champion Tigran Petrosian in the final candidates match. He won that 6.5, 2.5. So across the interzonal and the candidates, he'd put together this incredible streak, 20 consecutive wins against top-tier international players. The sources note that only Wilhelm Steinitz, way back in the late 19th century, had a comparable streak. The momentum was just immense.
And this amazing run, it wasn't just about wins, it translated into his rating. The July 1972 FIDE rating list.
Yeah, his ELO rating was 2785.
And the sources stress this. That was a massive 125 points higher than the number 2 player, Spassky.
Right.
To give some context, today a 30-point gap at the very top is considered huge. 125 points, it's just unprecedented. It showed a level of superiority that, well, maybe nobody in history has ever quite matched.
And all of that built up to the absolute peak, the 1972 World Championship match against Spassky in Reykjavik, Iceland.
The match of the century.
That's what the sources all call it. It really became more than chess. It was publicized as this U.S. versus Soviet Union clash right at the height of the Cold War.
Huge media attention.
Immense. Millions worldwide who'd never followed chess were suddenly tuning in. And Fischer won, 12.5, 8.5, became the first American world champion. The sources also mention how much this event did for Iceland, putting it on the global map in a unique way. And it cemented Fischer as, well, a global icon.
So those were the incredible highs of his chess career, just an arc of dominance you rarely see anywhere. But, as the sources make very clear, Bobby Fischer's life wasn't only about the wins and the titles.
No, definitely not.
Let's turn now to the other side of the coin. The significant personal challenges, the public controversies that really marked his life, and sadly became more and more prominent over time.
Yes, the sources do detail a challenging personal life, seeming to start pretty early on. One source mentions resentment towards his mother's absence, her political activism during his childhood.
He was just so intensely focused on chess.
Completely. The sources say he left formal education at 16 just to dedicate himself entirely to the game. Although, interestingly, he taught himself languages like Russian, specifically to read chess literature from the Soviet Union, which was often considered the most advanced back then.
His personality. The sources describe it as, well, uncompromising, often difficult. And while that maybe drove his ambition, pushed him to demand better conditions for chess professionals.
It also led to a lot of conflict, withdrawals from tournaments. The sources mention his constant demands, specific lighting, certain shares, higher prize money, changes to formats.
Demands that organizers often saw as eccentric or maybe just unreasonable.
And it often led to him just pulling out of major events, which frustrated fans and the chess world, He famously skipped the 1964 interzonal, which meant he missed the 66 World Championship cycle entirely.
He even skipped some U.S. championships, right? Saying the 11-round format was too short.
Yeah, compared to the longer events in Eastern Europe where he felt, they took chess more seriously.
There was also that controversial accusation back in 1962.
Ah, yes. The sources mention he accused Soviet players of collusion in the candidates tournament. Published an article, didn't he? The Russians have fixed world chess.
He alleged they'd make quick draws against each other to save energy, then gang up on the non-Soviet players.
And while the sources suggest the tournament structure and the Soviet team dynamic might have allowed for that kind of thing, his public accusation was really inflammatory at the time, stirred up a lot of suspicion and bad blood.
Then, after winning the World Championship in '72, the sources suggest the spotlight, the pressure of being champion, it really seemed to weigh on him.
He didn't seem comfortable with that level of fame, the celebrity status that came with the match of the century.
And that discomfort, along with those uncompromising demands, led to maybe the biggest controversy of his chess career in 1975.
When he refused to defend his title against Anatoly Karpov, the sources are clear on this.
He made a list of demands to FIEE, the World Chess Federation, about the match format. Non-negotiable demands.
That's right. Things like needing a 10-win margin, draws not counting, and the really controversial one, the champion keeps the title if the score reached 9-9 and wins.
FID rejected some of those, especially the 9-9 rule.
They did, and the sources state very clearly, when FID didn't meet all his demands, Fischer forfeited the title, defaulted.
Just gave up the World Championship without playing a move. It was shocking.
Yeah.
And it basically meant he retired from competitive chess for, 2 decades?
Pretty much. A total disappearance from the top level of the game.
He did pop up again for that one event.
Yeah.
the rematch with Spassky in '92.
In Yugoslavia, yes. And the sources highlight how controversial that was, too. The U.S. had sanctions against Yugoslavia because of the Balkan conflict.
So playing there was a direct defiance of the U.S. government.
Absolutely. And it led to a warrant being issued for his arrest back in the States.
So, facing arrest if he returned, he essentially became a fugitive, lived abroad, kind of in obscurity.
Yeah, the sources detail his life as an émigré Hungary, the Philippines, Japan over the next several years.
And it's during these later years that the sources describe, well, increasingly erratic behavior. And we have to report impartially here, based on the material. Some deeply inflammatory and offensive statements.
Yes, the Wikipedia source is quite detailed on this. It mentions his public comments, including things like denying the Holocaust, expressing really strong anti-Semitic views in radio interviews, at one point reportedly calling himself a victim of an international Jewish conspiracy.
And the sources also report comments he made right after the September 11th attacks in 2001.
From a radio station in the Philippines, yeah. Reportedly saying he was happy about the attacks, making anti-US and anti-Israel remarks. Again, we're just conveying what's in the source material we reviewed. These statements are documented.
His legal problems finally caught up with him in Japan in 2004, detained for trying to use a revoked U.S. passport, apparently.
Right. He spent several months in custody, facing deportation back to the U.S.
Until Iceland stepped in.
Yes, in 2005, he was granted Icelandic citizenship. The sources suggest this was partly in recognition of the 72 match's importance to Iceland, but also on humanitarian grounds. He lived out his final years there.
And even after his death in Iceland in 2008, there was more controversy, a legal battle over his estate.
A complex one, yeah. The sources mention claims from an alleged daughter in the Philippines, his nephews, even the U.S. government wanting unpaid taxes.
It got to the point of exhuming his remains for DNA testing.
It did, according to the sources. To settle that paternity claim, the DNA disproved he was the father. Eventually, an Icelandic court ruled his Japanese wife was the rightful heir to the estate.
Looking at these later years, the sources do touch on the psychological side of things too. One YouTube source talks about the sheer intensity of chess, maybe a link to mental health issues for some top players, mentions paranoia.
And the Wikipedia source notes different views on Fischer's mental state. Some sources suggest maybe paranoid personality disorder, but it also includes the perspective of a friend, a psychiatrist, who disputed a schizophrenia diagnosis.
What did the friend say?
Reportedly stated that Fischer had problems, possibly from childhood traumas, and felt he was often misunderstood. Described a caring, sensitive person underneath the difficult public persona. It's a complex and pretty sad part of his story as the sources tell it.
So we've seen the incredible highs, the dominance on the board, and then these deeply troubling lows and controversies. But despite all that, the sources also credit Bobby Fischer with some really significant, undeniable contributions to the game of chess itself. He wasn't just a player. He changed things.
Oh, definitely. First off, he was a hugely influential writer and analyst. His book, My 60 Memorable Games.
A classic.
Absolutely. The sources describe it as renowned for its painstaking, objective analysis. And what's really striking is he includes losses and draws, not just wins. Shows this rare honesty, this depth of self-critique.
Even Gary Kasparov studied it, the sources say.
They do. It's considered fundamental for anyone wanting to learn how to really analyze chess games properly.
And his impact on opening theory. The sources mention that too. He was known for incredibly deep preparation.
There's that great anecdote from the Taimanov match in '71. Taimanov was an expert in a certain opening. Fischer plays this new move, a novelty that just stuns Taimanov.
Yeah.
And later, Taimanov finds out Fischer's move wasn't just random. It was based on this theoretically significant idea. Fischer had apparently dug up from a footnote in some obscure Soviet chess book.
A footnote Taimanov himself, the expert, had missed.
Exactly. That level of deep research was pretty revolutionary back then.
He also changed practical things about playing, the Fischer clock.
Yeah, the sources explicitly mention that as one of his inventions. Adding a small increment of time after each move, it's standard everywhere now, right? From online chess to top tournaments.
Its purpose was to stop players getting into terrible time trouble and blundering under pressure.
Precisely. Encourage better time management throughout the game. It really changed the rhythm of tournament chess.
And he even developed a chess variant later on Fischer Random, or Chess 960.
That's right. The sources explain his goal was to cut down on the reliance on just memorizing opening moves by randomizing the starting position of the pieces on the back rank.
It forces you to think creatively right from move one.
Exactly. Emphasize pure skill over rote learning.
And beyond the board, his constant, sometimes controversial push for better conditions.
Better playing conditions, higher prize money. The sources note that his advocacy definitely raised the standards for professional chess players around the world. He fought for players' rights, even if his methods were sometimes abrasive. It benefited the whole profession in the long run.
And maybe the biggest contribution of all, the sources universally agree. His incredible rise, and especially that 72 match against Spassky.
The whole Cold War drama around it.
It brought unprecedented global attention to chess, made it front-page news, inspired a whole new generation of players worldwide. That surge in interest is still felt today, isn't it?
Absolutely. His impact there was massive.
So when you pull back and look at all these sources, you get this portrait of, well, a chess genius, undeniable brilliance, profound impact on the game.
But also a life outside those 64 squares that was just tragically marked by deep personal difficulties, escalating controversies, and those deeply offensive public statements later on.
It's such a complex story. Raw, challenging to reconcile in many ways. It really highlights the intense demands of competing at that elite level, the pressures of fame.
And maybe the personal price that some extraordinary individuals pay for reaching those kinds of heights.
The sources definitely leave you with a lot to think about, don't they? That intersection of genius, fame, personal struggle, mental well-being.
And how someone's legacy can be so layered. Celebrated for groundbreaking achievements, yet profoundly complicated by their actions and words away from the board.
It certainly makes you think about that fine line, maybe a fragile one, between extraordinary talent and personal struggle. What stands out most to you after hearing about Bobby Fischer's journey from that child prodigy to world champion to reclusive exile?
We really hope this deep dive into the sources has given you a clearer, maybe more nuanced understanding of Bobby Fischer's complex life and his lasting impact on the world of chess.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. If you found this exploration valuable, please do consider subscribing to the show so you don't miss future deep dives. And if you'd like to support us in bringing you these explorations, drawing directly from the source material on fascinating topics, you can find info on how to donate in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another one.